I'd like to acknowledge and welcome you to Bidjara Country. This is my grandfather's territory here on this side of the gorge on Bidjara territory. So just off to the right-hand side of me over here is another cattle property where one of my great-grandfathers, my great-grandfather's brother, Fred Lawton, he was the last of the Lawton men to leave his country, and that was in the mid-'80s, and this cattle property is only a couple of kilometres over here. So my mother's father and all of those men for a very long time have been very familiar with this country. Yeah.
Let's talk about your time at university. So at Griffith, you were taught by quite an influential cohort of Aboriginal thinkers and makers.
Well, we start with Jennifer Hurd. Jennifer Hurd being a very senior Queensland artist. Jennifer established and convened that degree, the Contemporary Indigenous Australian Art degree. That's widely celebrated. But it starts with Jennifer because she set that program up and she kept it running for 22, 23 years. And then also in there, someone who was key for me was Laurie Nielsen. We're not far from where some of the stories he would tell, actually. As a student who hadn't been out into this country, I had a lot of stories that I could relate to Laurie orally about or be in conversation about. Tony Albert was having a solo show in the later part of my first year, and so I was looking for a studio assistant. So I got the invitation to come over and help Tony make some paintings. And then so from there, that opened out that whole world. Perhaps a little while after, Richard Bell had the need for some help. And sharing that same studio at the time was Judy Watson at Brereton Street in South Brisbane. And then from there, started doing some install work. So I then got to meet some of the Milani Gallery artists by helping to install exhibition processes at Milani Gallery.
Is that when you encountered the work of Robert Hunter, who's been a more explicit influence in some of your recent projects? That
would have been 2011, I think. And Robert Hunter was making a show with Josh Milani and was up in the Gabba. Robert Hunter was using his masking tape stencils, which essentially rolled up. It didn't dawn on me till later that here I was making stencils directly onto the gallery walls. But that was something that I spent some time helping Robert Hunter do.
After graduating from honours in 2013, you made your first trip to Carnarvon Gorge, near to where we are now.
There's a range of reasons why that was the right moment for me, but also for my entire family. So we were there, and I think we had 76 family members. We ate and celebrated very deeply over that Christmas 2013.
Did you also encounter things at the Gorge that then were formative in the direction of your art practice at that point?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. That was pretty big. We had it to ourselves, essentially. So I could take my time walking and visiting those sites that I had been told about and shown pictures of, having the opportunity to be on that country without open season touristic visitation.
Moving a little forward into the future, in 2021 you presented a major exhibition at Monash University Museum of Art, which was a collaboration with your mother, Kate.
Yes.
Could you talk a little about how that collaboration unfolded?
Listening to what someone else from outside would think to bring forward in the work, it's really important to the way I like to work. There was this other side research I was doing kind of as part of the PhD that I was doing at QCA. There was this research that was touching on Sydney Nolan and Margaret Preston, but Nolan and Preston had been inside Carnarvon Gorge. We'd been making the show, and some of that stuff started to find its way forward. Kate wanted to memorialise and to start to tell Grandad's story. Mum was shifting into telling Bidjara stories, or into telling her father's and her mother's stories via quilt making. And then I started to realise, hang on, Preston had this background. We're kind of heading in this other direction with some of the research. Kate's not far off it. And then eventually we aligned them up and invited her into the working towards presenting new work for the show.
And actually you've worked with a number of members of your family, invited them into your making process and the spaces of contemporary art. What I'm wondering is, what has that process surfaced for you and potentially for them?
Right. I've learned things about myself and I've learned things about us in that process of family members being able to make work. Sometimes the art world might be looking to produce a thing, have an outcome. But when cultural people get to step in and switch into gear, and then we get to witness or have an idea of them being artists in that space, that's when it's really moving, yeah.
That's interesting, because that actually brings me to the last question that I wanted to ask you about, which is about the show that you've just mounted in Norway at the Bergen Kunsthalle. How do you situate yourself in relation to the institutional spaces of contemporary art relative to your broader cultural practice and cultural life?
That's a goodie. Again, like institutional critique can come up, and we can bunker down in there, where you can also kind of stake out territory in that space, institutional critique. And I reckon working with colleagues, I reckon we can build things in that space. I can take a very specifically Central Queensland show there, or I can take a very specifically Australian show there, but that show ended up being, maybe the word might be universal. So that was, again, trying to look at where I was and being alert that there are all the stories there that I'm not a local to, and still wanting to be myself, but also bring something new, generate something. So in Bergen, I was wanting to treat the space, perhaps maybe not generate or replicate or make a Central Queensland space there in Bergen. I was looking to, treat the space in the way that if I walked in there, if a family member walked in there, they could read it in the same way that we've learned to read spaces out here on country. Being in those international conversations, I've been navigating that, trying to work that out. And one of the things that we've decided on is to work towards and try to look at making the work of place in the place that it's of, right? Because it could be easy for me to come here and take materials away to work with. And that's up for conversation, that's up for negotiation on whether that is culturally safe and appropriate and whether I should be doing that. But one of the things that we've been talking about in my family is to, come here and make the work, or go there and make the work, and talk about how that happens.